Let me paint a picture that might feel uncomfortably familiar. You have a decent paying job. You get your paycheck every 2 weeks. By the end of the month, you are looking at your bank account wondering where it all went. Not because you bought anything outrageous, no vacations, no designer bags, just small purchases that somehow added up to nothing in savings and everything in stress. That was my reality 3 years ago. I was earning a solid income, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, driving a used car, and still ending each month with under $1,000 to my name. I wasn't reckless. I just had no system, no philosophy, no intentional relationship with my money whatsoever. Everything shifted when I stumbled across a research paper on household financial behavior in East Asia. What I read stopped me cold. Japanese households, on average lower incomes than American households, were consistently saving 15 to 20% of what they earned. Not because they had more, because they operated from a fundamentally different money philosophy. I spent the next several months studying that philosophy. Not the tactics, the philosophy, the mindset underneath the habits. And then I applied what I learned, one principle at a time. Over the course of a year, by month 12, my savings had grown from under $1,000 to just over $17,000. Same job, same salary, same city, different operating system. Today I am going to walk you through the 10 Japanese money principles that made that transformation possible. These are not life hacks. They are not budgeting tricks. They are proven, centuries-old approaches to money that most Americans have never been introduced to, and that are completely applicable to your financial life right now, in 2026, regardless of what you earn. Let's get into it. Habit number 1, Kakeibo. The handwritten money journal. We start here because this is the foundation that everything else is built on. Kakeibo, pronounced Kakeibo, is a Japanese household budgeting method that dates back to 1904. It was created by Hani Motoko, one of Japan's first female journalists, as a way for women to take real ownership of their family's finances at a time when that kind of independence was nearly unheard of. Over a century later, the system is still in daily use across Japan. That longevity tells you something important. Here is the entire system. At the start of every month, you take a notebook and write down 4 things by hand. How much money is coming in, how much goes to fixed expenses, how much you want to save, and what remains for spending. Every single day, you record what you spent. Each purchase gets sorted into one of 4 categories: needs, wants, culture, meaning books, education, or enriching experiences, and unexpected expenses. At the end of the month, you ask yourself 3 questions. How much did I actually save? What went well this month? What will I do differently next month? That is the complete system. No subscription. No algorithm. Just a pen and a $3 notebook. Now here is why this matters, and why it outperforms every budgeting app on your phone. When you tap a card and see a number flash on a screen, your brain barely processes it. Neuroscience confirms this. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, is barely engaged during frictionless digital transactions. But when you sit down at the end of the day and physically write food delivery, $38, want, something different happens. Your hand is communicating to your brain in a way your phone never could. You made a choice. You are owning it. A woman named Renee, who works in marketing in Atlanta, tried Kakeibo for the first time after years of cycling through budgeting apps she would download, use for 2 weeks, and abandon. She told me the difference was dramatic. With the apps, she felt like she was watching her money from a distance. With Kakeibo, she was present for every dollar. By her third week, she had developed a new internal filter before purchases. Do I want to write this down tonight? When the answer was no, she put it back. Her discretionary spending dropped nearly $400 in her first month alone. According to YouGov data, nearly half of all Americans entered 2026 without any budget whatsoever. Of those who do budget, most rely on apps that automate the categorization, which means the brain never does the work. Kakeibo forces your brain awake. And once it's awake, it does not go back to sleep quietly. Habit number 2, Mottainai. Treating waste as a moral failure. There is a Japanese word that has no precise English equivalent. Mottainai describes the feeling, something closer to grief than guilt, that arises when a useful thing is wasted, discarded, or taken for granted. In Japanese culture, wasting a resource is not just inefficient. It carries genuine emotional weight. It is considered a form of disrespect to the item, to the person who produced it, and to yourself. Now contrast that with American consumer culture. The USDA estimates that the average American household throws away approximately $2,100 worth of food every year. That is food that was purchased, brought home, and discarded. The EPA reports that Americans discard over 80 pounds of clothing per person per year. We replace smartphones on 2 to 3 year cycles, even when our current devices still function well. We buy furniture that gets abandoned on a curb when we move apartments. We do not have a word for the feeling that should accompany these behaviors. Mottainai gives us one. When I first started practicing this principle, I did something simple but eye-opening. For 1 week, I photographed everything I threw away from my refrigerator. The results were genuinely uncomfortable. Wilted greens. Leftover rice that sat untouched for days. Yogurt past its date. Bread that went stale. When I added it up, I was discarding nearly $35 to $40 worth of groceries every single week. That is more than $1,800 a year going directly into the trash. I made 3 small changes. I started meal planning around what I already had before buying more. I started freezing leftovers immediately instead of hoping I would get to them. I started buying smaller quantities of perishables more frequently. Within 90 days, my grocery spending dropped by almost 25%. Not because I was eating less, but because I was wasting less. Mottainai extends well beyond food. Changes how you look at everything you own. Before replacing something, you ask, can this be repaired? Has it genuinely reached the end of its usefulness, or am I simply bored with it? Does the newer version actually improve my life, or does it only improve my image? There is a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired using gold-infused lacquer. The cracks are not hidden. They become part of the object's story and, by some accounts, increase its value. That philosophy applied to your financial life means that the slightly worn, the slightly outdated, the imperfect but still functional has real value, if you choose to see it. Habit number 3, Hara Hachi Bu. The discipline of 80%. This principle originated in Confucian teaching and became deeply embedded in the culture of Okinawa, a region of Japan that holds one of the highest concentrations of people over 100 years old anywhere on Earth. The practice is Hara Hachi Bu. Stop eating when you are approximately 80% full, rather than waiting until you cannot eat another bite. The insight is not really about food. It is about enough. When you apply Hara Hachi Bu as a financial philosophy, You make a deliberate decision never to fill your life, or your spending, to 100% capacity. You leave room. Room in your budget. Room in your schedule. Room in your closet. Room in your emergency fund. That remaining 20% is not deprivation. It is margin. And margin is where financial resilience is built and practiced. This looks like the following. If your take-home pay is $4,000 per month, you structure your life to operate on $3,200. The remaining $800 is automatically moved to savings and investment accounts before you ever see it. Your spending reality becomes $3,200. You adapt, because human beings are extraordinarily adaptable when the option to spend simply does not exist. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that the U.S. personal savings rate sat at approximately 4% in early 2026. 4%. Meanwhile, Japanese cultural norms, embedded through practices like Hara Hachi Bu, push household savings rates toward 15 to 20%. That gap does not sound dramatic until you run the math. On a $60,000 annual salary, saving 4% means putting away $2,400 per year. Saving 20% means $12,000. Over 30 years, with an 8% average return, the 4% path builds roughly $293,000. The 20% path builds nearly $1.5 million. Same salary. Completely different outcome. The only variable is the philosophy underneath the behavior. Consider a real example. David, a hospital administrator in Phoenix, calculated 80% of his after-tax income, about $3,200 out of $4,000, and committed to living within that boundary. The remaining $800 went to a high-yield savings account and a Roth IRA automatically each month. After 20 months, David had saved and invested over $16,000. He told me the hardest part was not cutting expenses. It was retraining his brain to experience 80% as abundant rather than restrictive. Once that mental shift happened, the behavior followed naturally. Habit number 4. Kaizen. 1% better. Why most people know Kaizen from the business world. Toyota built its legendary manufacturing efficiency around it. But in Japan, Kaizen is not a corporate methodology. It is a life philosophy, and it applies directly to your finances. The principle: do not attempt to overhaul everything at once. Instead, improve by 1%, consistently, over a long period of time. Applied to money, Kaizen looks like this. This month, you reduce your dining out spending by 10%. Not 50%. 10. Next month, you raise your retirement contribution by 1 percentage point. The month after, you cancel one subscription you no longer use. Then you negotiate your internet bill. Then you swap one name brand item for a comparable generic. Then you start packing lunch once a week instead of twice a month. Each individual change feels negligible. But 12 months of unbroken Kaizen leaves you in a completely different financial position, and the transition felt almost invisible. The reason Kaizen outperforms dramatic financial resolutions is rooted in how the brain handles change. Large behavioral shifts trigger resistance from the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. That is why aggressive budgets set in January are typically abandoned by March. The brain reads radical change as danger and eventually forces a retreat back to familiar territory. Kaizen slips beneath the brain's radar. Small improvements do not feel threatening. They accumulate quietly until the day you look at your savings rate and realize it climbed from 5% to 19% over the course of a year, and you cannot identify a single moment of sacrifice that caused it. Habit number 5. Ikigai. Giving your money a purpose. Ikigai is often translated as reason for being. In the West, it has been popularized primarily as a career framework. Find the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But in Japan, Ikigai is far broader than career. It is the purpose that gives structure and meaning to your daily existence. Applied to money, Ikigai answers the one question that every budget, every savings app, and every financial spreadsheet fails to ask. What is the money actually for? Most Americans save vaguely, because they know they are supposed to. Or they spend impulsively, because something in a store window looked appealing. There is no guiding intention underneath the behavior. Ikigai provides that intention. When you identify the specific life you are trying to build, with clarity, not abstraction, every financial decision becomes a vote for or against that vision. A friend of mine named Marcus identified his Ikigai as building enough financial stability to start his own business by age 40 without needing to borrow money. Once that became his anchor, the impulse purchases that used to drain his account stopped feeling tempting. They did not just feel expensive. They felt beside the point. You do not need willpower to resist spending that conflicts with your purpose. You need purpose that makes the spending irrelevant. Habit number 6. Wabi Sabi. Contentment with what you already owe. Wabi Sabi is one of the most important and least discussed Japanese philosophical concepts, particularly when it comes to personal finance. To its core, Wabi Sabi is the appreciation of things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. Not in spite of their flaws, because of them. The bowl with a chip that has been in your kitchen for years. The jacket that is broken in exactly the way you like. The table that carries the marks of a decade of use. These things have a kind of accumulated value that a new item simply cannot replicate. American consumer culture operates on the opposite principle. Imperfection is a trigger to replace. A scratch on your phone screen. A scuff on your sneakers. A sofa that is slightly out of style. Every imperfection is an invitation to spend. The financial cost of this mindset, calculated over time, is staggering. Americans spend an estimated $9,500 per year on categories most driven by aesthetic dissatisfaction: clothing, home furnishings, and consumer electronics. If Wabi Sabi shifted even a quarter of that spending by extending the life of what you own, you would redirect over $2,300 a year toward wealth building instead. At 8% compounding over 25 years, that is approximately $178,000 generated from a philosophical shift, not an income increase. The practice of Wabi Sabi does not ask you to live with broken things. It asks you to honestly evaluate the difference between something that no longer works and something you simply no longer want because something newer exists. That distinction is worth thousands of dollars a year. Habit number 7. Osoji. The annual financial deep clean in Japan, Osoji is a year-end tradition in which households perform a thorough, intentional cleaning of their entire physical space. Everything is examined. What no longer belongs is let go. The new year is entered with clarity rather than clutter. Applied to personal finance, Osoji becomes a ritual you perform once a year, ideally in December or early January, to audit your complete financial picture. Every subscription, every recurring charge, every insurance policy, every investment allocation, every auto-pay arrangement, Every debt balance. You look at all of it simultaneously, ask whether each element is still serving you, and make deliberate decisions to cancel, renegotiate, or realign. The average American household subscribes to between 12 and 15 recurring digital services. Many of those were set up and never revisited. Combined with auto-renewing memberships, insurance premiums that have quietly increased, and investment accounts drifting from their target allocations, the financial drag from unreviewed arrangements accumulates significantly year over year. And my first Osoji, I identified nearly $320 per month in recurring charges I had either forgotten about entirely or no longer actively used. That was close to $4,000 a year silently leaving my account. A single annual review, 2 to 3 hours of focused attention, closed that drain permanently. Set a recurring calendar reminder. Call it your annual financial Osoji. It is one of the highest return activities you can perform on your own finances. Habit number 8. Choken. Save first. Spend what remains. Choken means savings in Japanese, but it represents something far more specific than the word implies. It is a sequencing principle. Savings is the first transaction that occurs when money arrives, not the last hope at the end of the month. The typical American financial pattern is earn, spend throughout the month, save whatever happens to remain. In reality, nothing remains, because spending naturally expands to fill whatever income is available. This is Parkinson's law applied to personal finance. Expenses grow to consume the resources allocated to them. Choken breaks that cycle structurally. The moment your paycheck arrives, a predetermined amount is automatically transferred to savings and investment accounts before you have the opportunity to spend it. Your spending reality becomes whatever is left. You adapt to that reality quickly, not because you have iron willpower, but because the option to access that money has been removed. In the United States, Choken looks like this in practice. On the morning after every paycheck, automatic transfers execute into your 401k, your Roth IRA, and your high-yield savings account. You never see that money in your checking account. It does not exist within your spending reality. Within about 60 days, your brain recalibrates and treats the smaller number as your actual income. Let me show you what this looks like in real numbers. Consider two people, both earning $4,600 per month after taxes. The first person spends throughout the month and saves whatever remains. In practice, very little remains. Her savings rate hovers near 3 to 4% annually, roughly $1,800 per year. The second person automates a transfer of $920, 20%, the morning after payday. He lives on the remaining $3,680. Uncomfortably at first. Comfortably within 2 months. He saves $11,040 per year. Over 25 years, at 8% average market returns, the first person's savings approach produces approximately $155,000. The second person's Choken approach produces roughly $858,000. Same salary, same city, same cost of living. The only difference is the sequence. Save first, then spend, not the reverse. The Vanguard 2025 How America Saves report found that automatic enrollment in retirement plans was the single most powerful driver of increased contribution rates among American workers. People who save the most are not more disciplined. They have automated the discipline. They implemented Choken without knowing the word for it. Habit number 9. Shinrin-yoku. Building a life that does not require spending to feel good. Shinrin-yoku translates directly as forest bathing. the deliberate practice of spending quiet, restorative time in natural environments. It costs nothing. Research published by the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture has linked it to measurable reductions in cortisol, heart rate, and blood pressure. It is effective, ancient, and completely free. The broader principle it represents is what I think of as free living. Intentionally designing your leisure, social life, and recreation around experiences that do not require a transaction. In the United States, leisure has become nearly synonymous with spending. Going out costs money. Relaxing costs money. A weekend without an expense attached to it can feel almost culturally incomplete. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that the average American household spends approximately $3,200 per year on entertainment. That number does not include dining out, travel, or shopping framed as a pastime. Japanese leisure culture offers a genuinely different model. Walks in nature, cooking meals at home with people you care about, reading, gardening, visiting parks and public spaces. The richest moments of daily life occur without a purchase. When I began building my weekends around activities that cost little or nothing, hiking trails, home-cooked dinners with friends, library visits, long walks through neighborhoods I had never explored, my entertainment spending dropped by more than half within 2 months. More importantly, the quality of those weekends improved. I stopped measuring enjoyment by what I had spent and started measuring it by how present I had actually been. That shift, from spending as entertainment to presence as entertainment, is one of the most profound financial changes you can make, and it costs absolutely nothing to start. Habit number 10. Hansei. Honest. Regular financial reflectio, and the final habit is the one that holds every other habit together. Hansei is the Japanese practice of sincere self-reflection. Not self-criticism. There is an important distinction. Self-criticism is emotional and often leads to shame, avoidance, and abandonment. Hansei is something more structured and more useful. It is an honest examination of what you did, what the outcome was, and what you will do differently moving forward. In Japanese schools, children practice Hansei regularly. It is embedded in the culture not as punishment for failure, but as a standard tool for improvement. You do not reflect because something went wrong. You reflect because reflection is how growth happens. Applied to personal finance, Hansei looks like this. Once a month, set aside 15 minutes. Open your Kakeibo notebook or your bank statement. Look at what you spent and what you saved. Ask yourself 3 questions with no judgment and no self-recrimination. Did I reach my savings target this month? Which purchases genuinely added value to my life? What would I choose differently if I could? That is the complete practice. 3 questions. 15 minutes. No spreadsheet required. The reason this habit appears last on this list is because it is the mechanism by which all the other habits sharpen over time. Without Hansei, Mottainai is just a concept you heard once. Without Hansei, Kakeibo is just a notebook gathering dust. Without Hansei, Kaizen has no direction. With it, every habit compounds, the same way interest compounds. Each month of honest reflection informs the next, and the next, until the gap between where you started and where you are becomes genuinely difficult to explain to the version of yourself who began. And here is the thing about every principle we just covered. None of them require a higher income. None of them require a finance degree, a financial advisor, or a premium subscription to a wealth-building platform. All of them require something far simpler and far more powerful: a different relationship with money. The wealthiest people I have studied, And I do not mean the highest earners or the most publicly successful. I mean the people with the deepest financial security and the least financial anxiety share one defining characteristic. They understand money at a foundational level. They understand that a dollar saved is worth more than a dollar earned because it arrives without the tax burden or the labor cost. They understand the difference between an asset and a liability. They understand that wealth is not performed. It is built quietly, deliberately, over time. That understanding has a name: financial literacy. It is the soil every one of these Japanese habits grows in. Without it, Kakeibo is just a notebook. Choken is just a word. Mottainai is just a concept from a YouTube video you watched and forgot about by the following week. With financial literacy, these habits become a system. A quiet, disciplined, profoundly effective system that builds wealth the same way a well-tended garden grows. Slowly, intentionally, with nothing wasted and nothing rushed. Japan has understood this for generations. These principles survived economic crises, cultural upheaval, and a rapidly changing world because they are grounded in something that never changes: respect for money as a resource, responsibility to yourself as its steward, and the steady discipline to treat both with the seriousness they deserve. You do not need to wait for a raise to start. You do not need to reach a certain income threshold before these habits apply to you. You may already earn enough. The question is whether you are paying enough attention to where it goes. A notebook, a pen, an honest look at last month's spending. That is where this begins. It is where it has always begun. If this video was useful to you, share it with one person in your life who is working to improve their financial situation. And if you are serious about building a stronger money foundation in 2026, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of content we cover consistently on this channel. See you in the next one.